Hello there. Once again, it's Anton from Anton Bay. Thank you for stopping by the collection room. Today we're taking a look at some comic books. These are A-list comics. Not a company I was terribly familiar with, but these are just called Pulp Fiction. And what they are is, I believe these came out in the late 90s, and they are reprints of some very, very old comic titles. I would love to find reprints of Planet Comics and definitely Wing Comics. These are very difficult to find and very expensive in modern. This was 1997, Pulp Fiction. And like I said, just reprints of some very, very old stuff. Now, the very, very old stuff they were reprinting, some of it's pretty rough. It's all done in black and white. Of course, I think these were originally in color. But some of the subjects, some of the topics, some of the things that happen would be pretty rough today for for the comics that I grew up in. Comic Code Authority stuff would not have endorsed a lot of these books for their content. Now you also get not only content like comics, you get a few like short stories that you would have pulled from some of the pulp magazines. Now they are illustrated, but they are clearly, I mean, they're like a kid story or a young person story, but they're not a comic, but they can be also rather rough as far as content goes. And it's funny because I had this discussion at work. Some of the stuff that would have been completely normal for kids to read or to have available to them in the 40s and 50s is not stuff that they would be allowed to have now. And yet some of the stuff they're allowed to have now is so much more inappropriate than back then. I don't know, it's kind of weird just what changed as far as what's acceptable and what isn't at different times. Because there's so much today that like would not have been acceptable 40s and 50s. And then you look at some of the pulp books that they had and some of the kids fiction and literature, and you're like, wow, that was acceptable for children back then. So just a weird outline of the way times change. And I always kind of appreciate these books because these books do well to outline some of that. A lot of the older comics do. You look at some of the old horror comics. I mean, like, was this available for everybody? Yeah, probably. But you get some you get a lot of like just actual short stories. Mow him down. The Haymaker. A little bit cartoonier look here. No, I found these fascinating, and I can't remember when I came across these. It's been a while, but they're not something that they're not very easy to find. It seems you're not going to see these in back bins usually. If you do, grab one because they are different. And as you know from my AC Comics videos, that I do love old books. I love reprints. That's one thing I love about AC was all the stuff that they would reprint and stories that would never be available to me I could finally get my hands on. And that is exactly what these books do. They just put stuff that like there's just no way you're going to be able to afford these comics in their original form, or the average person won't. The Lilac Lady by Margaret Keynes. Paris had pretty girls, a dime a dozen, but Conroy was to see one particular woman whose beauty took his breath away. He would not soon forget her dance in that mysterious den. He's in love with the stripper. Anyway, the Lilac Lady. And yet, like, who was this for? Kind of crazy. Young people must be told. Wow. That's an ad for you right there. I don't know, I don't know what to think about that one. Signed limited arts from Olivia. Oh my gosh, out of this world, Telec Cards, Planet Comics. have some of the best comic book covers ever in history. Like, this was pretty standard. I mean, this is, for one thing, it's beautifully done. It's fairly racy. That's actually quite racy. But was this on a kid's book? Was this on a pulp book? Young men's book? What was the deal back then? Because your content is straight up Will Eisner comic book heroes and stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, you look back at these books, and sometimes I've looked back at old horror books and stuff like that, and I've kind of looked at like Seduction of the Innocent and Frederick Wertham's ideas on stuff. And, you know, initially you always disagree with it. You're like, that's just censorship and book banning and stuff. But sometimes you have to kind of look at it through the time period and think, were they completely wrong? Were they out of their mind? I've thought this with some of the stuff in the 80s. I remember in the 80s, all the parents were talking about all the crazy occult stuff and all the TV shows and things like that. And, you know, you kind of look back at it with grown-up eyes. And you're like, were they crazy? Maybe a little bit. Were they absolutely wrong on everything? No, there's actually a lot of creepy stuff in kids' cartoons in the 80s. I remember watching a lot of that stuff, or going back and seeing it going, man, I remember that creeped me out when I was little. Like, I didn't need a grown-up to tell me that was creeping me out. That was just, some of it was just horrifying. The Art of Pulp Fiction. This is, I believe, just an art book. Like different panels, pages, shots, and works of the day. Paris Nights. Definitely some of this looks European. Yeah, some of that's very, very detailed. Yeah, whenever you look back at the history of censorship, what was acceptable in one time period to what was not acceptable in another, it's important, you know, to realize you're not there. You're not there in that time period, and it wasn't the same. It's never the same from time period to time period. There's stuff that I see today that everybody's fine with, and I would cringe with it in the 80s and 90s. Like, no. And yet, you know, you look back at different time periods where I look at stuff and I think, man, I don't see anything wrong with that at all. And they would be like, no, there's absolutely stuff wrong with that. So, yeah. And I think nowhere really identifies this or points it out as clearly sometimes as pop culture and comic books and the things that we let kids have and the things that were quote unquote totally normal for a kid to read in the time period, to what's totally not normal for a kid to read in this time period. Yeah, it just, everything changes with the times, or a lot of this stuff does. And mostly, you know, keep your own moral compass, but be careful judging other people's moral compasses back in different times, because some of that stuff, man, it's hard to say. Would I have cringed at this back in the day? Do I cringe at some of it now? Yeah, but back then, man, this would have been totally normal. So it's kind of how it is. But like I said, I don't think any medium probably points this out or shows it as clearly in like your comics and your things like that were designed for children. We obviously see it a lot in movies these days where things that were cool back then weren't cool now, but I still love seeing it in comic form, in pulp literature form, or in Pulp Fiction form as it's broadly known. And anyway, those are just my thoughts, and those are just some books that I picked up. I love reprints. If you see these, definitely go pick them up. And that's pretty much all I got. Thank you guys for watching. That's my story.